Well, it looks like I'm upsetting a few people, but I'm willing to in order to get the word out. My main concern is that the people of Holy Cross, Anvik, Shageluk, and Grayling are going to end up a sad whereas in the sad petition to Washington, D.C., where the government is no longer of, by, and for the people. Once you know the facts, I don't think you'll consider it for a nanosecond. The wood bison that A, D, F, and G plans to introduce into the district is the only wood bison herd in the whole United States. I wanted the bison in the headwaters of the Stony River until I learned the truth. They're Trojan bison. Once we allow them through the gates, they'll destroy our country from within. Look at Delta. They have plains bison to hunt. Over 16,000 people apply for a permit each year, and only 130 people get a permit. What do you think our chances will be 10 years from now when the bison are opened for hunting, if our lawyers perform a miracle and protect us from the federal and environmental nonsense? Do we want all those hunters hunting in our backyard? Do we really think we will get a permit? Our chances are better off in the local bingo parlor. Have you read the 10J exemption to the Endangered Species Act? Here it is. There's nothing here that makes me feel safe. The feds have never rescinded a 10J exemption yet. When did the feds pass up a chance to lie to Alaskans and take our land? When did the feds not lie to Indians? This is an endangered species we are talking about bringing into our country. These are the only wood bison in the whole United States. Look at the polar bears. Reliable sources say that there are 5 times more polar bears now than there were in the 1970s. But the feds have recently taken charge of 120 million acres from the Canadian border to below Kotzebue. And the polar bears aren't even endangered. Should we trust the federal government? Look at the Statehood Act. The feds knew we didn't have many people to tax in order to get revenue to run the state government, so the feds agreed to develop the resources of Alaska. The state was to get 90% of the revenue from those resources in order to run the state. With Innoko, President Carter violated the Statehood Act. The Statehood Act gave the state of Alaska 104 million acres of land. Innoko locked up an equal amount, 104 million acres. The feds promised they would never do that again. But recently, President Obama, in violation of the Statehood Act and Innoko, set in motion the process to take another huge chunk of federal land in Alaska and lock up that too in the name of wild lands. They lie, not once but always. Who in the federal government could sign a piece of paper that we could believe? I passed through Oregon when one federal judge shut down most of the logging industry in that state because of the spotted owl. Environmental groups said the endangered spotted owl only nested in old-growth trees, so the trees needed to be protected. Thousands of people were put out of work because of the owl. But the truth is, the spotted owl loves to nest in old pickup trucks and other such places. Recently, the Bush caucus met with former Governor Sheffield. He's tremendously frustrated. He's trying to do development on the Anchorage port, but the beluga whales are endangered. So every time a curious beluga whale comes by, there's 4 towers, and people have to sit on those towers looking for beluga whales. And as soon as a beluga whale comes by, all the construction projects comes to a halt. The cranes and derricks and all the equipment has to get off the dock, and they have to wait until the endangered beluga whale decides to stop being curious and swim away. Recently, on the House floor, we passed House Joint Resolution 17, urging the federal government to reconsider the situation in Unalaska. Unalaska had received an exemption to a federal regulation. The EPA has revoked that exemption in Unalaska regarding their water and secondary treatment plants. The EPA requirement is now an unfunded mandate of $9.5 million for the treatment, which includes cryptosporidium. And there's no cryptosporidium in Unalaska. The secondary treatment mandate is between $20 to $50 million. That totals over $6,500 for every man, woman, and child in a town that has 4,370 folks. When Unalaska appealed, the EPA said, "Too bad. The deadline for filing for such an exemption had passed." The reason I mention this is that we will be trusting in an exemption the same way Unalaska did. Okay, look how the feds locked up the Tongass forest. Remember, the Statehood Agreement Act said Alaskans could develop resources on federal lands and the state would get 90% of the revenue. Thousands of people were put out of their jobs by the federal lockup of the Tongass. Southeast villages are dying now because there's very little economy. Should we trust the environmental groups? Do we think they will not immediately file a lawsuit against the 10J exemption? Do you remember how the environmental groups lied to the people of Alaska during the predator control issue? That's why we have so few moose in many parts of the state. Environmental groups made big bucks on the wolf issue, bleeding money out of the uninformed people of the lower 48 to save the wolves. Those wolves wiped out our moose population. They would love to take your case to court. The only wood bison in the whole United States, this will be a big fundraiser for them. They'll make millions of dollars by challenging the 10J exemption. We Alaskans will have no way to fight back. It's interesting that environmental groups have stated that they won't oppose the 10J exemption in the introduction of the wood bison because there's no potential development in that part of the Yukon River. This is an indirect confession on their part that they do use the Endangered Species Act to stop resource development. But who knows what environmental group is going to come out of the woodwork and do their usual. The bill I've submitted to the House only requires the Department of Fish and Game to get permission from the legislature before introducing the endangered bison into a location in Alaska. It doesn't prohibit the introduction of bison, it just keeps folks from being buffaloed by the buffalo. If the land gets locked up, does the state government lose? No. Biologists still get to have their project studying the bison. Do professional hunting groups lose? Well, they'll lose the money they put into the project, but their country won't be locked up. Who are the losers? The people of Holy Cross, Anvik, Shageluk, and Grayling. What's the best case scenario? In 10 years, we get a 1 in 100 chance to hunt bison while competing with scores of outsiders tromping through our country. What's the worst case scenario? Your corporation land and all surrounding federal and state land will be locked up while the bison roam free. We will spend our lives in court, and some federal judge no one ever voted for, who could care less whether we live or die, will decide whether we can tiptoe in the tundra. The effect of the release of the Trojan bison will be irreversible. Once they're loose, the problem they bring will never go away. People of Holy Cross, Grayling, Anvik, and Shageluk, I think this is a huge mistake. Some of your young guys will go out in the snowy winter night to taste some bison meat, and they'll end up in federal prison for killing an endangered species. Let me make a suggestion. Tell Fish and Game you want plains bison, like Delta, Farewell, and Copper Center. I bet plains bison tastes just as good as Trojan bison, and you'll get all the benefits with none of the risks. The solution is effective predator control to get our moose population back. I fear that we will become a very sad whereas and a very sad petition to Washington, D.C. that doesn't listen even to our governor or any other entity in our state. Do you remember the Charlie Brown cartoon? Every year Lucy promised not to pull the football away. Every year Charlie trusted her, and every year she found another excuse to break her word and leave Charlie Brown laying flat on his back. It's like that. The federal government will find some excuse to break a promise. They always do.